Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, July 18th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about fundraising numbers and Joe Biden's whopping $72 million raised over the past 3 months in quarter two of the 2023 year for the FEC filing. Now, with this announcement, Biden and the DNC, in a joint effort, have raised nearly $100 million, more than Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump combined in this quarter alone. Now, it's important to mention, too, that Joe Biden has been in the race a little bit longer than Ron DeSantis, but significantly less than President Donald Trump. President Donald Trump, who out-fundraised Ron DeSantis by roughly $15 million, was fundraising the entire time. Even before he even announced his candidacy, Donald Trump established the Save America PAC, which in many words was essentially the wing that prompted him to run in 2024, given that they had over $100 million before Donald Trump even announced. Unlike many other candidates, Joe Biden only began fundraising the moment that he announced his campaign. Coming into the campaign, he had left over $1 million from money that was raised over the 2022 midterm election season, but beyond that, really didn't have much to stand on. Which means that by the end of April through July now, Joe Biden has raised $72 million, which is a substantial amount, especially given that he was competing against many Republicans who are now spending this money to infight. It's an interesting building up of a war chest that Joe Biden has been able to do over the past 2.5 months alone. As the sole primary Democratic competitor, as RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson are not regarded as the top ticket contenders, not regarded as primary contenders against Joe Biden. There will not be any primary debates. There probably won't be any competitive primaries, and Joe Biden is easily on track to win renomination in 2024. Raising $72 million allows him to build up this war chest for the general election, whereas Republicans who are raising money are using it now to compete against one another. There's two ways to look at this. The one is the point that I just mentioned, that Joe Biden is fundraising really for the general election. He's campaigning for the general election starting now, which is an advantage for being an incumbent, which is also the main reason why you practically always see incumbents win re-election. The American voters usually don't like that much change unless there's a drastic event that has happened nationwide, for instance, the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it also cannot be understated the benefit of campaigning for the general election since the very beginning. Joe Biden has been making and taking shots against the primary contenders on the GOP side, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, of course, President Donald Trump, and it's a positive thing for the Biden campaign because it gives him one, ammunition to run on for the general election, regardless of who the nominee is, and number two, because it shows that he's in this race to win it, that he's in this race not only as this candidate who feels obliged to run for re-election, as many presidents, I'm sure, in many ways feel obliged to run for re-election, pressured by their own party, even if they don't necessarily feel that it's the best thing for themselves. I mean, presidents may not always want to run for re-election, but I think in this case it shows that Joe Biden is absolutely up to the task, absolutely ready to run against whoever it might be in 2024. And this $72 million will get him there. So that's the first way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that it is a display of Joe Biden's political strength that has maintained itself since 2020. On one hand, yes, it's very good news because it shows, Biden is going to be able to focus on the general election. But I also think there's a takeaway from this that shows that Joe Biden is still that effective fundraiser that he once was in years past. That he is this effective candidate that can defeat Donald Trump in the general election and is very much able to, regardless of who that nominee is. The money here shows that there is still a substantial amount of people backing him that believe in him, that truly think that he will be reelected in 2024, which is becoming increasingly more likely as the days go on. Now, The Hill went through the quarter two reports and discussed the winners and losers from the second fundraising quarter. Usually, fundraisers are very early indicators of one, who will make it to the primary stage, as there is usually a donor threshold, and number two, who's going to be doing well in the near future, not necessarily because of debating, but rather just based off of resources that are at their disposal. And the winners right now, largely in part on the Democratic side, at least, are Joe Biden. Joe Biden declared as the first winner of the quarter two fundraising report victory. You can see here that at $72 million, he does better than both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, even if you put them together. Now, they also say Donald Trump is, raking in a lot of cash, that he does win in this challenge. And, in a way, they're right, or at least win in this quarter two fundraising, because he is raising tens of millions of dollars and doubled his fundraising from the first quarter. It's good news for him on that side, but it would be better news if, one, he was the presumptive nominee and, focusing on the general election, which in many ways he is the presumptive nominee, but we have yet to see any actual primary contests begin. But also the fact that it's $35 million. It is impressive, but it's not as impressive as $72 million. Ron DeSantis also in this race has raised roughly $20 million. Now, it's been only 6 weeks, which means that if you were to double it over the quarter, he'd be raising roughly $40 million if you want to extrapolate it that way. But even then, it still rivals Donald Trump's and is still $30 million less than what Joe Biden raised in this amount. I mean, if you were to extrapolate it still, apply it to the 3-month period, Joe Biden, who announced at the end of April, didn't fundraise leading up through the earlier parts of the month, he would be at $80 million. And then again, yes, with Ron DeSantis in a hypothetical having a 3-month campaign period, also, Joe Biden would still out-fundraise both of the candidates combined. It's very interesting, but it is the start of a very strong campaign. Joe Biden also, what I can point out too, has yet to fill his campaign staff to full capacity. Unlike Donald Trump, unlike Ron DeSantis, the Joe Biden campaign is quite frankly a hodgepodge put together group of people at this point in time because they don't need to focus as heavily as you might think. Joe Biden is still naming finance directors. He's still naming regional outreach people, regional outreach officials on the campaign. A lot of the administration officials are staying in the administration for at least this summer and fall, and maybe will jump ship to the campaign in the next year. But Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump have already started to do really big recruitment strategies for their presidential campaigns. I mean, you can see that with fully fledged campaign staffers across a number of states, you're already starting to see that Ron DeSantis has taken in more than he can pay because he's starting to lay off some of his staffers as a result of the current situation with his cash on hand, fundraising numbers that aren't as beneficial as he might have hoped. Ron DeSantis is at a point where he has hired too much, whereas Joe Biden has yet to even hire. So Politico released an article today talking about how Joe Biden is filling out his 2024 campaign team. But isn't that interesting? That without a campaign team, he himself as a candidate, Biden and Harris, have raised $72 million for his reelection bid. All concerns about enthusiasm and lackluster support from Democrats and abysmal approval ratings are thrown out the window when you are raising such large amounts of money, such large sums, especially given that you were roughly a month out of the fray leading into this quarter two count. Joe Biden did very well. His numbers here put him at a very, very good position, especially given that none of this money will be focused on a primary contest. Versus Ron DeSantis, where 100% of it will be focused on a primary contest. Donald Trump, 100% of it will be focused on a primary contest. And we shouldn't expect one either. While RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson are in the race, again, they are not the serious contenders like Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom might be. And with major endorsements coming in from all parts of the party, obviously the establishment, the centrist wing, the conservative wing, all fully fledged Joe Biden supporters, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the very well-known squad member, progressive, left-wing, leftist member of the United States House of Representatives, has already endorsed Biden's reelection campaign. She was one of the main voters who held out on Nancy Pelosi's renomination to speakership, one of the main Democrats who held out on a number of bills that were seen as bipartisan, largely because she was upset with the direction of the bill being too right-wing, not left-wing enough. I mean, seeing that she has come out in support for Joe Biden is a very strong signal of Democratic unity. The Associated Press got this headline on the money by saying it sends a strong signal of Democratic unity because that's exactly what it does, and so do these fundraising numbers. So as we look back on the 2020 election, we look ahead to 2024, we will see where this money is going to be sent and how money in the 2022 race was so effective at determining the outcome of many of these competitive races. John Fetterman had to fundraise to keep up with Dr. Oz's fortune, and he won by 5 points. Raphael Warnock out-fundraised Herschel Walker and his fortune and was able to win the Georgia election. In Arizona, Mark Kelly out-fundraised Blake Masters, and he won his election. Kathleen Cortez Masto out-fundraised Adam Laxalt, and she won her election. Maggie Hassan out-fundraised Don Bolduc, and she won her election. While there are some exceptions, Tim Ryan being one, Mandela Barnes being the other, where out-fundraised candidates on the Democratic side who did better than the GOP in money raising still lost their races, in many ways, they did well. And it wasn't just the Senate races, too. It was the governor races where you saw Josh Shapiro out fundraising Mastriano, dominated that field. Same thing with Whitmer, same thing with Evers, same thing with Walz, same thing with Kelly, same thing with Hobbs, same thing with Mills. I mean, all around the country, you saw a complete wave against the GOP's expected wave, which counteracted it, and you found that there was a red puddle in the House. Democrats expanded in the governorships. Democrats expanded in the Senate. And overall, it was a very good night for the Democratic Party, a very lackluster one for the GOP. And while a lot of people do blame President Donald Trump, and I don't think that, he wasn't, mostly to blame. I think he takes most of the responsibility for these losses. It also was the fact that Donald Trump's influence allowed Democrats to out-fundraise. For instance, in the state of Pennsylvania, John Fetterman was able to fundraise so much more because of the fear of someone like Dr. Oz ending up in the Senate. The fear of people that were unqualified, the fear of people that were propped up by the former exiled president by many of these swing states. I mean, you will see here that the way that candidates treated the opponents to Trump-endorsed candidates was largely positive because of who they were running against. It wasn't just that Pennsylvania, and though they may have wanted John Fetterman, they also very much did not want Dr. Oz. That explains why there was an even better margin here for John Fetterman than there was for Joe Biden in the presidential election. And the same can be said amongst many of these other states. This surge in support for Joe Biden on a monetary scale displays a surge in enthusiasm and a surge of concern for the potential opponents that might face him in the general election, like Ron DeSantis, like Donald Trump. 2020 served to be the most expensive election year in history, with over $1 billion spent on both sides of the aisle, not combined, individually $1 billion. And what that told us and showed us was that the campaigns of today are nothing like they were before in fundraising and efforts in what fundraising can tell us. Because in almost every single swing state, Joe Biden outspent Donald Trump. He out-fundraised Donald Trump, had more small donors from those states, and you know what happened? He won. Now, Donald Trump is very much on track to win the nomination with or without money. I think that he holds a grip on these voters in a very positive way, but swaying those independents in the general election is where money matters. And already, Joe Biden starts off with $72 million for the general election now. He starts off with that today with a unified party behind him, with strong numbers on the Republican side showing that Donald Trump is very much on track to win the nomination, which is a very good thing for the Democratic Party. The pieces are starting to fall in the right place for a Biden re-election campaign. We talked about this before. We talked about how a perfect storm would be necessary to allow Joe Biden to win re-election in 2024, given that he's not exactly the most popular president. But he is still a president who is a tried and proven candidate, who won in 2020 against the candidate that is now running again and is now the front runner on the opposition side. There is so much that has to go right for the Democratic Party, so much that has to go wrong for the GOP. But as was the case in 2020 and especially 2022, everything is going in the right direction for the Democratic Party. Plainly put, the right direction, and we are on track to see a Democrat win re-election, Joe Biden win re-election in the 2024 presidential election. These fundraising numbers are abysmal for the former president and Ron DeSantis, given that Joe Biden out-fundraised them both. Even if we were to extrapolate it to the 3 months with Ron DeSantis, who only had half the time to fundraise, you still see that because Joe Biden has built up such a large war chest that even then, Joe Biden still out-fundraises them both. Combined, separately, whatever you want to think about it, Joe Biden has done a very good thing for his campaign. Done very well in fundraising, and it shows, and it allows him to fill out this campaign team, to become stronger in his efforts, allow himself to head into this general election with such a large war chest that no Republican can compete leading into it. And it would be the exact playbook that allowed President Barack Obama to win re-election, Bill Clinton to win re-election. It is taking advantage of what you know, taking advantage of a lack of a competitive primary and using these numbers and using these fundraising efforts effectively, using the money in a well-spent way, which allows Joe Biden to be elected yet again for another 4-year term should he play his cards correctly. We will see what happens, though. Never underestimate the ability of a political race to change overnight in a few hours based off of different changes in funding. But what we have seen thus far is that Joe Biden has begun to do very well with fundraising efforts, with just 2.5 months of campaigning under his belt at this point in time, compared to months for many other GOP contenders. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.